Hello, everyone. As some of you may know, my name is Priscilla Carmini. I work on the traditional territories of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit, which is Waterloo, Ontario, and Toronto, Ontario, respectively. I'm the Digital Repositories Librarian at the University of Waterloo and the chair of the Carl Canadian Repositories Community of Practice Steering Committee. So I just want to welcome you all to today's event, which is called Current Challenges and Future Directions for Institutional Repositories, Snapshots from the Literature. This session is part of our article release party series, which is hosted by our community of practice. And so to get the most out of today's discussion, we hope that you have come prepared and have read the article, but if not, I will link it into the chat after my introduction. It's excellent and super well written, so I definitely encourage you all to take a look if you haven't already. And if you have any other articles that you would like to suggest for this series, please feel free to email me directly at pcarmini@uwaterloo.ca, and I will include my email in the chat as well. So it is my true pleasure today to introduce you to our speakers, Laura Rothfritz and Lisa Matias. So Laura Rothfritz is a research associate and PhD candidate at the Berlin School of Library and Information Sciences Department of Information Management. She studied at the University of Applied Sciences, Potsdam, and completed her MA in Information Science in 2019. Her doctoral research started in 2020 and is scheduled to be completed in 2026. Congratulations. Since 2023, she is a member of the board of directors of the Einstein Center for Digital Future, ECDF. Her main research interests are in the area of research data management, infrastructure studies, and open science, with a special focus on socio-technological perspectives on the relationship between data infrastructures and societies, and a strong relation to science and technology studies. The topic of her dissertation is trust and distrust in public data infrastructures, with a focus on data rescue activities in the US, which is super interesting. And then we have Lisa Matias, who is a research associate in the project Professionalisierung der Open Access Repositorien Infrastruktur in Deutschland. So that's PRO-OARDE, respectively. And previously, she worked as a postdoctoral researcher at Hanken School of Economics in Helsinki, Finland. With a PhD in political science from Free University Berlin, she brings extensive experience in mixed methods research, data analysis, and project management. Her research on the topic of open access has been widely received and garnered significant media attention in publications such as Nature News. And Lisa has contributed to multiple international projects, including as a visiting scholar at Simon Fraser University in Canada. Very cool. Her research interests include open access, specifically the sustainability and costs of different access models, research evaluation, and research policy. And she's a member of Skolcom Lab. So fantastic. We're so excited to have you both here. I'm just going to have a few final notes before we begin. So folks, please keep an eye on your email in the new year and in the Skolcom Mattermost, as we are planning an event for February 2026 that does require some community participation. So we hope you will be interested in that. And also, if you're not aware, there is a free scholarly communications channel on Mattermost for Canadian Skolcom librarians that allows librarians to connect with their colleagues in similar fields. If you're not in that Skolcom and would like to be invited, please send me a personal message on Zoom and I will send that link to you. And without further ado, I will hand things off to Laura and Lisa to share their presentation. Thank you both so much for being here.
So once again, thank you again for having us today. We are excited to share a little bit about our article with you today. We were surprised to be invited. We worked on this article for quite some time. We did a bunch of revisions on it, so it's nice to have this feedback that people actually read it and liked it. Also, good evening from Berlin. We are both in our homes today because it's evening here, and we just had a joke, or made the joke that you might see up to 3 cats in our in our screens. So maybe you'll like it. Um, right. So the article is called Current Challenges and Future Directions for Institutional Repositories, and the article is a systematic review. So we will talk a little bit about that. Next slide, please. Thanks, Lisa. Um, what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to give you a quick introduction, an overview of the methodology we used, not super in depth because that's well, it's kind of boring, and you've all seen that. But if you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat at any time. We will make sure to answer them. And then we will have an overview of the findings, which might interest you more than the methodology. And then we kind of made made the point to share with you a few key patterns that we found while we were writing this paper, and couple of suggestions for future directions. And then we will have a discussion, I guess. And we also prepared a couple of questions for discussion, but feel free to ask anything you would like. Slide. All right. Okay. We are going to start with institution repositories. This is a very basic overview slide. I don't think I have to explain to you what institutional repositories are, so I'm not going to cite the literature or give you a detailed definition. I think what is very important for this article and for our work is that we see institutional repositories as organizational and technical services, which I think you can all agree. So, and we will see this also in the article, we are always thinking about technical parts of repositories, but also people and organization who kind of run the whole repository. Also, we come from, maybe because of our background, we are in Europe, we come from this kind of view on repositories that they are key implementation tools for open science policies. So, for example, the Nelson Memo, which is more US based, or Horizon Europe has some policies that pertain to institutional repositories. In the UK, the REF is very much connected to institutional repositories, so just keep that in mind. You can see on the slide, this article was part of the research project that's currently still running until next year, which Lisa Matthias is part of, which is called Pro OER.de. I'm saying this in kind of a German way now, but Priscilla almost perfectly said it in German already. The project, the goal for the project is basically that especially Lisa is working very closely with the German institution repositories community to figure out practical and strategic resources for institution repositories in Germany. So the DE stands for Germany. The article, of course, is not only about Germany, but this is our main focus because we are funded by a German funder. Right, next slide, please. All right. So our research question for this article was, what are key challenges for the operation of institutional repositories according to LIS literature from 2014 to 2024? And I've underlined key challenges, operation, and then according to LIS literature here, because this basically gives you the frame that we were working with. So we were looking for challenges, which might be discussed in the literature from the perspective of the operation of institutional repositories. And we will see later that a lot of the literature, this is kind of a spoiler for you, is a lot about the users, but not as much about the people who actually run the repositories. And we were looking especially for that. And then of course, we looked at LIS literature. So we narrowed our search down to literature which comes from a background in LIS and LIS journals. Okay. Quick overview of the methodology. You see the nice Prisma diagram here. So we did a systematic literature review, which is Prisma compliant. We used 2 databases, LISA and Scopus. I don't know you are probably all familiar with LISA, which is which is actually the database we focused on at first. In the limitations, we can talk a little bit about that, and also in the discussion, we were not super satisfied with LISA in terms of um, what it covered, what it was like to work with it for a systematic review. And also because this was part of the revision, we also used Scopus for the literature search. We searched for literature which was published between 2014 and 2024, so 10 years, covering 10 years. And we focused on institutional repositories, of course, and like I already said, challenges from the perspective of IR managers, not from the perspective of users. We identified large amount of studies, and then the screening and inclusion, exclusion, and we ended up with 50 studies, which we included in our final paper. We have some inclusion criteria described in depth in the paper, which you can also look at. Just for like a quick overview, we look for institutional repository focus, for something around challenges or issues. We made sure that the articles were peer reviewed, and we focused on English and German because this is the two languages we mainly speak. Next slide, please. Okay, before we go in depth with what we actually found in the papers, we thought it might be also interesting to you to see a little bit of the representation. So what kind of like years were covered, where was the literature from? And if you can go to the next slide, Lisa, you can see that the yearly distribution is kind of is kind of okayish. So there was some literature in every year. A quick spike in 2019, but not super noticeable. But then the continental distribution is very interesting, and we checked this many times for both databases, and it ended up being from the African continent. I'm so sorry, from the African continent. So the literature that we found, and that the majority of the literature that we analyzed in the end originated, we used the first author for this, or was about repositories on the African continent. So this is important to keep in mind. Then we also looked at, okay, where are the articles actually, where can they be found? So we are talking about institutional repositories, right, and open access in this space of literature. And we found that most of the articles were not open access, and most of the articles, a large amount of the articles were not, could not be found in institutional repositories. So take this and think about it, and we can maybe talk about this later, but this, I think, was an interesting result. Methodologies, so we looked at what kind of methods were used in the articles. There was a mixture, but most of the articles were quantitative, with a couple of qualitative articles and then a couple of mixed methods articles also. Okay, what did we do? So we read all 50 articles, of course, and then we used MaxQDA, which is a qualitative coding software, kind of NVIDIA, if you are familiar with that, something that we use in Germany. And we coded all articles. We coded deductively, so we were not looking for themes, but we were kind of coding and recoding as a group. And we ended up with 15 codes, which we then grouped into 6 main themes. You can see here, so the 6 main themes are strategic anchoring, professionalization, financing, technology, content and quality, and usage. And I've kind of grouped around the codes that we use for these main themes. And we will talk about this later, especially for the themes, but you can also look in the article what we actually meant by the main codes and how we structured the themes. Just a quick overview of where the codes and themes could be found. So we looked at each article and tried to visualize what which codes or which themes were present in each article. On my right side, maybe also your right side, who knows? You can see the distribution of the codes, and here you can also see that the most the percentage behind the themes are the number of articles or the percentage of articles we found this specific theme in. So you can see most of the articles had something to do with professionalization. So that was something that we found most in most articles, and then going down until financing, but more than 50% of the articles had all themes in them.
Okay, I'm going to take over. I'm going to walk you through our findings. I'm going to briefly define each of the themes and then share some of the key insights that we found. So first up is strategic anchoring, which we defined as the alignment of the repository with different policies. So these might be policies from research performing or research funding organizations, but also anything that signifies an institutional commitment. And what we found was there were like three different options. So first, either there was a complete lack of self-archiving policies, which of course affects deposit rates massively. Second was you did have policies, but they were not mandatory. So they did not move past the recommendation or encouragement stage. So deposits remained voluntary. Or you did have deposit mandates, but they were not coupled with monitoring activities. So it made it really difficult to track progress or to enforce deposit mandates. What the studies did mention, though, was that funder and national mandates have a really positive impact on deposit rates, but there's also downsides to it. So those mandates can often reduce repositories to mere compliance machines and not really highlight the bigger value that repositories play, especially in the open access transformation. And they also create extra monitoring work that is often not recognized or valued. As a final point, we wanted also to mention that there's often like low awareness and support from leadership and the management level up to the point where it's sometimes questioned why they should have a repository uh, in the first place. And that, of course, makes it really difficult for repository staff to balance external expectations, for example, from funders, with institutional priorities or the reporting systems that are already set in place. Then the second theme is professionalization. So that is anything that concerns the staff and the skills, but also governance and workflows and the collaboration between library staff and IT staff. Because at the end of the day, that's what repositories are, right? They're a mix of IT work, but also more traditional librarianship. Um, but those IT skills, they're often missing from formal librarian training, while at the same time, repositories do struggle to attract IT specialists because they are lower paid roles usually. And that then creates a tricky situation where you don't have people that have this specialized knowledge, really. On top of that, we found that institutional decision-making processes are often very complex, while repository governance is not really clearly defined, and that can slow down implementation processes. That is especially the case when you have conflicting ideas around what is the repository meant to be? Is it a place where we merely park theses or dissertations, or is the institution going to use it as a scholarly communication platform? From the author side, it was mentioned that authors can often be discouraged to use the repository if deposit workflows are inefficient, if user interfaces are too complicated, or if they have not enough options to select. And that might indicate planning processes where authors or like the end user are not really concerned in at that stage. Then we come to the financing, and by that we mean internal or external funding streams, which the literature doesn't really distinguish between the two. And financing issues were common in all regions, but how they played out or the extent to which repositories were affected was quite different. So we found that case studies from the African continent, they mentioned that a lack of funding is often the main obstacle when it comes to developing and then running the repository. But then studies from the US and the UK, they're already running repositories, but they mentioned that they're doing so often without dedicated budgets. And then that cost like only limited funds to be available for software or equipment. Um, and that is being further complicated by new strains on the work, by new policy tasks that are added without adding additional funds or staff to the repository. And then finally, we also found that funding problems are widely acknowledged in the literature, but only a few studies take a longer term look to address the financial sustainability of repositories. Then the next theme is technology and preservation. So this concerned the ICT foundations that allow repositories to run reliably, to interoperate with other services, and to make sure that the content is accessible. And here again, the African studies had a bit of a special topic. So they mentioned unreliable internet connections, low bandwidth, and unstable power supply, as would be common in countries where load shedding is being implemented. Other studies mentioned obsolete hardware or software or repositories that were locally developed, but then caused downstream issues in maintenance or that didn't play nice with other widely used platforms. And then another thing that we found was quite surprising was that long-term preservation of content or the repository as a whole was not really treated as a main issue ever. It was only mentioned as like a side note within broader ICT problems. Then we move to content and quality. So that means that the repository has content that is relevant and diverse and is able to capture really all the research outputs from the institution, and ideally alongside with high quality metadata, which we know is difficult in every context. So poor metadata was one of the most frequently mentioned issues. But then from the author's side, the studies mentioned that authors are often insecure when it comes to copyright and secondary publishing rights, and that often arises from unclear publisher policies. And then when you have repository staff that is, of course, not really an expert in copyright issues, they cannot really support authors in this, and they might be discouraged from depositing their work in the first place then. Another thing that I found surprising that this came up was that repositories are seen as less prestigious places for the work of the authors compared to journals or subject repositories because or in addition, they also lack usage metrics, and authors fear plagiarism or misuse of their work, which kind of reminded me of the early fears that came up in the open access sphere, so from like 20 years ago. But this was mentioned several times in the studies that we looked at. And then finally, we come to usage. So that is the awareness and the acceptance of the repository within their institution and the community there. And as I mentioned several times in the other themes, repositories do struggle to get content from faculty, and this might have various reasons. Either faculty are not interested in sharing their work openly, or they might not have the time. They see this as an extra step that they have to do. They might prefer disciplinary repositories or have various fears. In the studies, it came up that repositories are built or centered around a build it and they will come logic. So kind of we build it without the user in mind. And then once it's there, we also, or they had to limit their outreach and marketing activities, whereas it would be useful to meet the researchers where they are, have informational events perhaps, or workshops to get authors to share their work. And yeah, it was said that without clear metrics or statistics, researchers would experience repositories as black holes, or kind of like your desk drawer where you put your work, it gathers dust and you can forget about it.
Okay. Um, then we come to a quick overview or maybe some pointers for the discussion we are going to have today. Um, So what are some cross-cutting patterns that we noticed? You saw the themes, and Lisa told you everything about the themes that we saw, but we thought for this presentation we were going to try to go a little bit meta and try to tell you what the meta themes we think we found or we think are in the literature. So the first one, and I've teased this in the very beginning, we see also from the literature that institutional repositories and the challenges around them are systemic and interlinked. So they are cannot be reduced to just, okay, here's a tech problem, or I don't have the newest software, but they staffing, funding, technology, everything reinforces each other. So if you don't have staff that's trained in the newest technology or in copyright, for example, you will have trouble getting content into the repository and so on. So these challenges, especially also around governance. So how does the institution the repository belongs to actually supports the repository and the repository staff in the literature? These challenges were kind of like bottleneck challenges. So they sit behind the problems that then occur downstream. So if the repository is not supported very well, you will not have enough staff. You will get problems in metadata quality and marketing, in preservation, and so on. And then also what we said in the beginning, the work in institutional repositories blends technical infrastructure and relational work with researchers. And this is something that we found in the literature a lot of times, that institutional repositories managers or people who worked in institutional repositories had trouble communicating to the researchers the value of institutional repositories. And sometimes this can be seen as a lack of marketing, if you want to speak in economic terms, but sometimes it's as much as they didn't really know how to encourage scholars to deposit anything in their repository. And then this is basically something that can be fixed by the newest software or by the best internet access or anything like that. That is really a people problem. Next slide, please. This is for us a very important thing to say once again. There are, and we really found also in the literature, uneven global conditions for repository development, institutional repository development in specifically. So some of the themes or codes we found in articles from the African country, which you remember, African continent, oh my God, I'm so sorry, African continent, which you remember were most of our articles actually were talking a lot about connectivity issues and power supply issues and things like this, which for other countries like maybe Canada, the US, and Europe also are not problems that we really think about, but these are really fundamental problems for many of the articles we read. But we want to say that this is all according to the literature we have analyzed, that we got from our systematic review. And we want to make sure to really stress this, because there can be an inherent publication bias, right? So if you do a systematic literature review, you can only analyze what has been published. And we discussed this, and we thought, okay, what why do we have so many papers from the African continent? Is there a trend here? What's happening? One of the things is that we think maybe this is just the stage the institutional repository development is there at this time. that we looked at, so between 2014 and 2024. And these problems have been discussed in the literature for other countries before that. And then also what I mean by publication bias, we found a lot of articles which we included according to our inclusion criteria, but which were clearly salami slicing articles. This also has to be said. We could not exclude them because we defined our criteria, so we had to include them, but there were actually a lot of articles that we noticed because we, of course, looked at the authors, looked at where they came from, were from kind of one larger project, and then just several articles about that. Finally, so you saw from our results, there is a tension between compliance and value. So if you have mandates and metrics, remember we were looking at repositories as part of the open science movement in general, and as also part of compliance to policies from Horizon Europe for the REF or for NASM mandate. There is a risk to reduce institutional repositories to compliance tools. So if you just run an institutional repository at an institution to have something to dump your papers in to comply to the mandates that the funders give you, the value will not be seen by the researchers. And this is something that will be a challenge to kind of navigate this tension between actually showing the value of institutional repositories and then also showing their value in benefiting these policies. What do we suggest for maybe future directions? So we kind of did this according to our themes. For strategic anchoring, this is where we talked about how institutional repositories are supported by their organization or institutions. We think that there need to be clear and enforced and meaningful policies. So a lot of the literature said, okay, the policies are either not there or not really meaningful or not very clear. And we think that institutional repositories should be integrated into institutional strategies beyond just compliance for policies. This is looking back to what I just said. Professionalization, there needs, and I think the community has been talking about this for years, but there's still a problem to bridge kind of library and IT works. And this was talked about in a lot of the literature. So roles in repositories need to be filled by people who can do both library and IT work. And there needs to be a way to have people who are able to do that and who want to do that also. Financing, this is no news to anybody. Of course, there needs to be base funding for institutional repositories, and also what we didn't really find in the papers we read, in the literature we reviewed, was a lot of discussion about sustainability, and I think sustainability for the long term, not just for the next 10 years, but I don't know, for the next 20, for the next 50 years in digital preservation, we say 100 years, right? Needs to be discussed more. So what happens, for example, if an institution goes bankrupt, or if there are political changes, and what happens to the content in the repositories, something like that. Technology, of course, you all know that, but it's still not everywhere the case. Also, speaking from the German perspective, we also have that problem in Germany still because we are not as digitized as many might think. There needs to be software for the repositories that's interoperable and upgradable. And there are a lot of open source softwares for that, or open source solutions for that, which work really well. But then we go back to professionalization, right? You need the people who can actually work with these. If you buy in a solution from one of the big suppliers for institutional repository solutions, it's going to be very, very expensive. And then we go back to financing, right? And then content and usage. Finally, many repositories have to figure out how to maybe clearer communicate about rights information for publications, but this is hard to do if the rights information are not clear from the publishers, right? And it's a tricky thing. It's a thing where people who don't have a background in law, for example, are not very proficient in, don't want to risk anything, and this is super understandable. But this right now is a big challenge for institutional repositories. And then also, what Lisa said in one of the findings is that institutional repositories sometimes are seen as not as valuable to researchers because they don't align with academic incentives, which what is academic incentive? Reputation. Where do you get reputation? From big journals. So this is something that some repositories are working on to, for example, provide metrics, but then you can also discuss how valuable are metrics, and do institutional repositories want to succumb to this way of judging research. Limitations, I'm not going to read this out. This is a slide which we added because these slides will be shared with you, I think, and this is being recorded. So just to have it here. Again, we want to really emphasize the time frame. So this was 10 years of institutional repository literature from 2014 to 2024. This is the time frame we choose. Anything before that or anything that has happened after 2024, we didn't include in our study. And then the regional skew I've talked about in length, but just to mention again that this is something that is a limitation in our article, in our study.